Father, Son, and Violin. A personal life story tells the vivid of Mao's China. Daniel Olson Chen. Dedicated to my parents and all of their generation.
Special acknowledgements.
My special thanks to Ms. Mercedes Larbenz. Without her encouragement and inspiration, hard work in editing, artwork and her publishing assistance, this book would never have been made public. Father, Son and Violin. Chapter 16. How step by step, I went abroad. 1. Dongya's pregnancy and the conservatory graduation. With the order from Secretary Yu, the wife of the big boss Li and mother of Nini, who used to be my shelter, Vice Chief Zhou of my orchestra came to Shanghai to fetch me. Comrade Zhou was originally from Shanghai, therefore to him, being sent to Shanghai was certainly a candy errand. Hearing that I was wanted to return to Hunan without taking my final exam, I certainly refused to obey. To me, coming to study in Shanghai was like climbing the Himalayas. After going through all the obstacles and tribulations, I finally got very close to the top. How could I possibly roll down to the bottom? Zhou realized it was a waste of time to go on persuading me. In Chinese we say, to sing a song to an ox. He turned his effort to my girlfriend Dongya. After a long conversation in Shanghai dialect, Dongya changed her attitude and also suggested that I go back to Hunan for the time being. She said,
Comrade Zhou is your leader. He came from such a long distance, over 1,000 kilometers, to take you back. If you refuse, what could he do with his face?
His face?
Meanwhile, I was reminded of Teacher Guo, and all the effort she made to get me into the conservatory, and me being not only me, but also her teaching achievement, her artwork. I lost my temper with Dongya. I yelled.
All my struggling and bitterness in the past and all my life in the future have to be given up for his face, that yellow, ugly face?
In the end, Dongya made a compromise that she would accompany me back to Hunan. She said she would tell the leaders in my orchestra that the pregnancy thing was all her fault and she would take all responsibility and consequence. After 2 months back and forth persuading me, I started to give up as it looked like I had no choice but to go back to Hunan at once. Yet it was very close to my final graduation exam, which was postponed once already because of the film making. If I asked for another postponement from the conservatory, I would most likely never be able to graduate. At exactly this crucial moment, a man appeared in front of me after having disappeared from my life for many years. That man was not anyone else but my father. After being apart from each other for all these years, when my father saw me again, he wasn't like the fathers you see in movies, excited. Instead, I was greeted with no special facial expression at all, as if we had met each other a day ago. He very briefly told me that he was coming to Shanghai on his party business and happened to stay at a small hotel very close to the conservatory. After having supper with me at the school dining hall, he went to see Dongya and Comrade Zhou alone. He went to see them both again the next morning. The second day he only met me at the school dining hall during the meal. On the third day, before he went back to Hunan, he said to me,
No need to go back to Hunan at this point. Finish whatever you need to finish in Shanghai. Concerning your working unit, I'll talk to your leaders as soon as I'm back in Hunan.
My father's few simple words raised the prejudice of him that I had built in my mind for many years. I instantly felt warmth and love, if it wasn't that our family had a no-hugging and touching tradition, as well as his ice-cold face, I would probably hurtle up to embrace him. Yet my father did not hug me, nor shake hands with me. He simply passed me 2 renminbi and 80 cents, saying that it was for the 2 suppers I had paid for him at the school dining hall. As soon as my father went back to Hunan, Comrade Zhou came to see me, saying,
Although your father's opinion has his argument, my mission is to bring you back. How can I go back with nothing?
What do you want me to do?
I counter-questioned him.
Unless you punch me in my face, otherwise.
I didn't wait for him to finish his words and gave him what he asked for, a big punch on his face. In fact, I could have given him 2 punches if he would have liked. Comrade Zhou covered his loose incisors with his hand and returned back to Hunan. I'm sure he never expected such a favorable errand of coming to Shanghai would cost such a price. Meanwhile, almost every day Donya's mother worked on persuading her daughter to have an abortion. The mother even wrote a letter to my former teacher Gua, asking her to talk to Donya. However, I insisted Donya give birth to the baby. Besides, the baby would be our flesh and blood. He or she might bring me a favorable position to go on staying in Shanghai. At that time, Chinese people had no right to stay wherever they wanted to stay. They had to stay where their folk registers were. After my father returned to Hunan, he went to negotiate with the leaders of my unit immediately, and though his tone was very polite, his words were rather heavy. After all, father was a Communist Party member, a government cadre who knew the rules of the officialdom game. In addition, it was the period in which the Chinese Communist Party launched the strengthening the legal system movement for the first time after being in power for more than 3 decades, therefore my working unit couldn't ignore my father's opinion completely. In order to solve my issue, both parties agreed to have an imitation lawsuit. My father found himself a lawyer and the unit also got a lawyer. With the case ongoing, it seemed that if I got married to Donya immediately, it would favor my father's party. As for my punch on Comrade Zhou's face, as he was the one who asked for it, was not enough to be a criminal act, so I was only given a demerit punishment. For this matter, father came to Shanghai again. This time he didn't meet me, but went straight to see Donya and her mother. His advice to them was,
As the matter is now, the best solution is to get married immediately.
Hence, Donya and I registered for marriage right away at the Shanghai Sahik government office. Just like that, no pastor's orison, no church bells, no wedding dress, no photograph, no party, and not even a dinner for family members and friends. I got married with my very first wife Donya. As soon as the marriage registration procedure was done, Donya applied for an abortion permit certificate from her work unit. At that time, hospitals wouldn't accept abortions without work unit certificates, and the work units wouldn't write abortion permit certificates to unmarried couples.
What? The purpose you got married with me is to be able to get an abortion certificate?
Donya, however, didn't argue with me about the abortion matter, but said something else to me.
To tell you the truth, the reason I decided to get married to you is not completely for the sake of love, nor following some senior's advice. It is more I feel sorry for you, for I realize that in the world, besides me, there isn't anyone else who truly loves and cares for you. So, all right, too many words could spoil the matter. The only thing I want to say to you is I would stay with you as long as you need me.
She ended there, and took out a handkerchief, as if I had gotten cancer. Regarding why she changed her mind and decided to go for an abortion, she was not willing to explain. After a long time of asking for the reason over and over, she reluctantly agreed to postpone the date of the abortion till after my graduation examination. Through conversation with Donya, I could feel that her decision to get married to me had been influenced by my father. For that, I started to be grateful to him. After all, we were father and son. Henceforth, I concentrated all of myself to practicing the violin and successfully passed the final graduation examination. To everyone's surprise, adding the points of all subject exams together, I was number 1 in my whole class. After all the hardship and madness for 4 years, eventually I graduated from the Shanghai Conservatory of Music. Two, what to do after graduation. Like most people, I also thought that when I entered a university, it was a step leading to heaven. However, all university graduates would experience the same, what do I do after graduation? All Chinese people would know that for outsiders to remain living in Shanghai, although it may not be as difficult as going to the moon, it certainly is more difficult than immigrating to the United States. Therefore, after a few attempts, I gave up. But, for the sake of having a life together with my newly married wife Dongya, I tried to look for a job with orchestras in the cities near Shanghai. Both Suzhou and Wuxi expressed their willingness to accept me, particularly Wuxi, which promised me the position of concertmaster of the orchestra. Once again, I deceived Hunan and packed up my stuff, ready to go to Wuxi. Just one day before I had planned to go to Wuxi, I went to say goodbye to Chai Ben. After all, he was my best friend and more importantly my dependent in Shanghai.
Why do you want to go to Wuxi?
To Chai, hearing this news was like hearing the sun rises from the west.
Because Wuxi is close to Shanghai, I can't stay in Shanghai. Wuxi is the best place I can go. That's why.
I explained with all my reasons.
What's good about staying in Shanghai? Every one of your classmates are trying to go abroad, and they don't even speak as much English as you do.
He then told me that the majority of my schoolmates are planning to go to the USA, UK, or Australia.
That's because they're all rich as well as have relatives abroad.
I said without much thought. Chai didn't wait for me to finish. He interrupted and advised me that everything could be created with effort, including money and relatives. He strongly opposed me going to Wuxi, saying that if I go there, it was like putting a period on my life. Then he took out a few letters from the Eastman School of Music, Indiana University, etc.
Write the addresses down, then go back and write letters to them. The Americans are trustworthy. If you write to them, they surely will answer. When you receive their answers, you make the next move according to what they require. Step by step, just like that. One day you will find yourself walking on a street in the United States, or somewhere in a free world. Then, when you think back about today and that you wanted to go to Wuxi, how ridiculous it will seem.
Chai went on and on. The second day, I made a long-distance call to Wuxi saying that due to my wife being about to give a birth to our baby, I wasn't able to go there immediately. The same day I wrote 2 letters, one to the Eastman School of Music of New York, and the other to Indiana University. Very doubtful, I figured sending my letters might be just like throwing them into the ocean and never receive answers. Surprisingly, both institutions wrote back to me and both said that they would be happy to accept me for my MA studies. In the letters were also enclosed materials concerning English proficiency, TOEFL tests, and visa information. That made Chai very satisfied and proud. He said,
Just as I told you, the road comes out by people's footsteps. Your next move is to go back to Hunan, take the TOEFL test, apply for a passport, find a financial sponsor, prepare money for the air ticket.
But, my wife is expecting. How can I leave her alone here and go back to Hunan all by myself? It would be the same problem if someday I really could go abroad.
I didn't know how to finish my sentence.
As this is your private business, I shouldn't interrupt, but being a real friend, I feel this is not the right time for you to have a child. Wait until the condition is mature, then you can have as many children as you like. I know there is no one family, one child policy in the United States.
With Chai's advice, I went straight to talk to my wife Dongya.
About our child and my second thoughts.
Dongya didn't wait for me to finish my talk. She interrupted.
No need to persuade me anymore. I have also changed my mind. I'll do as you asked and have this baby.
She said as she touched her full belly.
This small fellow recently likes to kick me. Look! He did it again. Touch, and touch here quickly.
Dongya held my hand against her belly tightly.
My little fellow, this is your father. Can you call father? Understand?
The movement of Dongya's belly shocked me, making me aware more strongly than ever that that was already a life made by Dongya and me. There was in no way I could talk more about the matter of abortion. A few days later, when Dongya found out that I had changed my mind about giving birth to the child, she burst into tears. When she got out of the hospital after the abortion, she looked to be in great agony. She said, grumbling,
I swear I'll never be pregnant again, never.
What did you say?
I pretended.
Nothing.
Danya closed her eyes. Later, we divorced exactly as my father planned, and as she had sworn, Danya never got pregnant again. More details will be given in following stories. 3. Paving my way abroad. The very first thing I did after I went back to Hunan was go to see CEO Li, and more importantly his wife Auntie Yu. Knocking at their door, I was so afraid the person who opened it would be Nini. But my worry was unnecessary, as Nini was no longer living with her mother and stepfather. That was the biggest scandal in the history of the Hunan Radio and TV Bureau. The rumor said that Nini was pregnant, and what's more, to everybody's shock, the one who made her pregnant was not the son of some big dignitary, or a well-educated gentleman with a social status, but a temporary part-time worker at a low-class factory. A delicate fresh flower that no one dared to touch yet has been put with a heap of smelly bullshit, was what my colleagues gossiped and felt sorry about. Of course, no one was angrier than Nini's mother, Aunt Yu.
How dare he? The boy didn't even ask me.
How could Aunt Yu know that the whole reason that boy could succeed was because he dared to be with her daughter without asking for the mother's permission? This to me alone seemed to be clear and understood. The timing of Nini's pregnancy was not long after the news of my wife Donya's pregnancy had spread back to Hunan. If the timing was not a coincidence, I was probably, at least to a certain degree, responsible for Nini's happiness or sadness, if her life was to be a sad one. It was 1983 when I returned back to Hunan. The Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping launched a nationwide academy diploma campaign. All the government officials of a certain rank must have a college diploma. This caused our Chief Lu a great headache. At close to age 60, he had to go to night school to study for a diploma. I remember one day Chief Lu was criticizing a comrade for being late to work. Surprisingly, the comrade talked back to him.
You dare to criticize me again, and I won't help you with your studies anymore.
In order to have more time paving my way abroad, I took a journalism correspondence course at the Beijing Broadcasting Institute in Hunan. By doing so, I had a very good excuse not to take part in orchestra rehearsals often. That was, naturally, not good for the orchestra. One day, the orchestra leader Kong Kong told me,
"Okay, concentrate your time and mind on your study now. Come back to the orchestra again as soon as you finish."
That is to say, only a few months in Hunan, after having been absent for 4 years in Shanghai, I was off work again studying full-time, of course with full salary and school fees paid by the Hunan Radio and TV Bureau. Who benefited the most from the Red China socialist system? I, the little 9 brother. The journalism correspondence course had class only half a day a week. What should I do with the rest of my time? When my story comes to this point, I need to again mention Humimi, the next-door neighbor girl with whom I grew up. As I returned back to Hunan a married man, there was no way I could look for new girlfriends. In addition, I was too busy preparing to go abroad to fool around with girls. Hence, Mimi came to see me often. That killed part of my loneliness, of course, as my sister, like a real sister. However, for that period Mimi was also quite busy with her university studies. The university she attended was not a well-known one, wasn't even considered to be a good one, for it was a poorly funded private institution named Hunan Science and Technology University. I could care less whether it was a well-established institution or not, as long as I could learn something, it was good enough for me. Therefore, through the introduction of Mimi, I got myself into the English class at the institution. After getting close to my English teacher, I used him as a bridge and got myself into an English class at the Changsha Railway Institute, the one known as the best English class in the city. By doing that, I ended up studying at 3 different universities at the same time. Thinking back on all of this, I really should say, I owe you a great deal to my Phoenix brand bicycle. Here, I particularly want to mention a few words about the privately funded Hunan Science and Technology University, as what I learned, far more important than English, was the theory of system engineering of society, as well as the consciousness of the information age we were approaching. For that knowledge and consciousness proved to be very useful for my life then and in the future. For that, I would very much like to say to the founder of the institute, thank you so much, Professor Zhang Qi-En. (4) TOEFL test of English as a foreign language. As I mentioned earlier, I studied Chinese and English with a husband and wife who taught at Changsha No. 2 Middle School at the age of 16. In addition, I studied English very hard during my violin study at the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, thanks to Yen Yue too, so when I went to take the TOEFL test, I already had a good foundation of the language. Plus, I took some English lessons at 2 different universities and the result was my test score being over 600. I sent the result to 2 American institutions for my post-education, Eastman School of Music in New York and Indiana University. I was immediately accepted as a master's degree student by both. 2 formal letters of acceptance reached me. 5. Getting my passport. I dare to say, no one in the whole country got one's passport as smoothly as I did during that time, unless somebody's uncle was a police boss. I took the letter of acceptance from the Eastman School of Music to the Hunan Police on Monday. The police officer gave me a paper form, asked me to finish all the requirements on the form and then to apply for my passport. The contents of that form included working unit certificate, folk registration certificate, university entry notification letter, I-20 form, money guarantee certificate, etc. It was exactly at that time that the country's campaign of reform and open door went into effect. Efficacy was a very popular slogan. I quickly ran back to the broadcast and television bureau where I worked. From orchestra, library, folk register, etc., I had my paper full of red stamps, until finally I went to see the number 1 boss, General Director Li took a look at my papers and deeply sighed, saying,
"The sky wants to rain and my daughter wants to marry, nothing I can say. You go."
Just like that, I got my last red stamp and the most important one. That is to say, I got all that I needed done from my working unit within 1 day. The second day, in the early morning, I went to Hunan Police again. The police officer looked at my documents, obviously unable to read English very much, and asked me, which is the I-20 form and which is the letter of finance guarantee certificate. I picked up the letter of acceptance from the school and told him that it was something similar to the I-20 form. As I had no economic guarantee certificate, I had picked up a school document that concerns economic guarantee and said, "This is a relevant document of economic guarantee." The officer used a pencil and marked the Chinese letters I-20 and Finance Guarantee Certificate.
When can I get my passport?
I asked eagerly.
Not very clear,
the officer replied.
You are the one in charge. If it isn't clear to you, then who would it be clear to?
I was quite worried.
The comrade in charge will be absent for some time. I'm only temporarily replacing his position. However, as far as I know, a passport application takes about 2 weeks generally, if not a bit longer,
the police officer said.
2 weeks? Oh my God, I mean my Chairman Mao. Efficacy is the slogan today. You see, our Broadcast and Television Bureau took only one working day to finish all procedures. Our leader would like to see how effective the police could be.
I challenged him.
Okay, I will do it at once. But there are a lot of procedures. So it's impossible to do it in one day, say, as quick as 3 days, I can try. That should be ready by Friday.
The policeman said with confidence. My few words about efficiency worked, perhaps. I got my passport on Thursday, which was only 2 days after I handed over all my papers. About the fees, it was several 10 RMB, not much money, that included the cost of the copies and the fee for the passport itself. I even forgot to bring a few packages of cigarettes to the police. 6. Making money to go abroad. Once I had my passport, which was very rare for a Chinese at that time, my comrades in orchestra started to ask testing questions about when I leave for abroad. Even my personal belongings such as furniture, bicycle, etc., were settled by other people. Although I always answered very soon, in my mind it was very clear, to go to the United States was still very elusive because I had no economic sponsor and no money to pay for the expensive tuition. Under such circumstances, it was completely impossible to get a visa from the U.S. Embassy. Whatever, I had no choice except to find a way, working hard, to earn money. The know-how to make money from selling paintings that I learned from teacher Chai in Shanghai was the only money-making skill I knew. So, I moved the whole thing to Hunan. I went to see many artists in Hunan, paying about 10 to 20 renminbi apiece for their Chinese paintings. Then, I would take the paintings to an expert to have them mounted, and sell them for 100 to 200 renminbi apiece to foreigners. My customers included foreign English teachers, tourists, and sometimes even foreign individuals whom I met on the street. There was an event by chance, or by destiny, that changed my life. One day I was invited by a TV reporter from Hunan TV to act as an interpreter in order to interview a Chinese cultural study group from Australia. During the interview I got to know an artist named Lawrence Tan. After a few outings together we kind of became friends. That changed my life. One day, I brought about 30 Chinese paintings to Lawrence's room hopeful that he would like some and pay for them. As I introduced him before, Lawrence himself was an artist. He used his very critical eyes to appreciate some of my paintings and then commented that my paintings were pretty good, at least they were original art, not like those commercial copies selling at the so-called friendship stores, used to be shops only selling things to foreigners that tourist guides took them to. Next, he made a call to another guest. About 10 minutes later, there was a queue outside Lawrence's room. Lawrence let everyone in and I gave a brief speech about Chinese paintings. In fact, I was no artist myself, so only told them something very shallow that I had learned during the business, but everybody looked very interested and serious. The atmosphere was somewhat like a classroom. As soon as my talk finished, one person asked me,
"How much?"
How much what?
I asked.
"How much money? For this painting?"
She pointed to a silk painting with very easy to understand English.
Oh, this is a small painting, 80 renminbi.
I explained. Someone else asked, "How about that one?"
That one is bigger, should cost 200 renminbi.
The group of Australians were all amused by the fact that Chinese paintings were priced by size just like tablecloths. Someone again asked me if I took only RMB or Australian dollars as well. I told them it didn't matter very much, even how much they paid didn't matter very much, as long as they pay. While I was talking to Lawrence, everyone was busy looking for paintings they might like. In the end, I sold every single painting I brought there. My ragged army bag was filled with Australian dollars and Chinese renminbi. That was the richest day in my life up till then. In fact, I had never seen so much money at one time before that day. That was a day I will never forget for as long as I live. It seems everyone bought paintings from me, except one man, Lawrence. After, I explained to him that I was making money in order to study abroad and that I also needed a financial sponsor. Lawrence obviously didn't know the real meaning of sponsor and told me that if I was going to Australia, I wouldn't need a sponsor if I brought some paintings with me that were real art. Australia. I never thought about Australia. Up to then I only thought about the USA and the USA only. 7. Go to Australia. One year passed very quickly. That was the time I visited my paper wife Dongya in Shanghai. Why paper wife? You see, in China by that time, people could not move freely from place to place. One had to stay in one's birthplace. Even if people from two different cities married, they could only live together in the smaller city which one spouse had lived, but not in the bigger one that the other came from. I was from Hunan, a much smaller city than Shanghai, but Dongya is from Shanghai, so we had to live separately even though we were supposed to be married. Certainly I went to see my old friend, the one who taught me the painting business, teacher Chai Ben. When Chai heard my story about Lawrence, he said,
"Why not Australia? Why must it be the United States? Now it's not where you choose to go, but where you can go, except Tanzania or Zambia."
Then he handed me a brochure of La Trobe University in Melbourne.
"Your English is good. Going there to study English literature should be the quickest way to get yourself abroad."
That changed my life's course from the USA to Australia. Following Chai's advice, I applied for English studies at La Trobe University in Melbourne. I wrote a letter to Lawrence about my coming to Melbourne. Lawrence was really a worthy friend. He called the university straight away. Less than 3 months later, I received a letter of acceptance from La Trobe University. The next task was applying for a visa. Although up to then I still didn't believe I could really get myself abroad, I started to believe Chai's saying, "There was no road, man walked on it, step by step, the road became." 8. Obtain a visa. Every Chinese abroad or trying to go abroad would know, no visa, no going abroad. In order to get a visa, one must have money or a financial sponsor. I, at that time, just like many others who were trying to get out of the country, had gotten everything but. Though I was so sure my hope was elusive, still I decided to go to Beijing to have a try. Even if in the end I could not go as I wished, I would have an explanation, an excuse, an answer for Dongya, Chai Ben, and for every one of my friends and fellow orchestra members, and most importantly for myself. Just like that, holding my passport, I went to Beijing. Very early the next morning after my arrival in Beijing, I went to the Australian embassy. Before I could even get close to the front gate, I saw an announcement written in Chinese, "Overseas Student Visa Section, please go this way," then the address with a map. Luckily the place wasn't too far away. I quickly walked towards the address. Still a fair distance from the building, I saw a huge crowd in front of a big mansion. Strange, applying for a visa in China was like buying a train ticket, no proper line. When I got close to the building, it was not strange anymore because now I was one of the crowd, trying very hard to go forward. Of course I was not pushing others away to get myself in for a visa, but to read another notice as there were just too many people. There was no way I could read what was on the notice, only overhear people asking the same questions to which no one could give an answer. Why did they close visa issuing temporarily? When will they start again? Meantime, inside, a Chinese staff member made an announcement.
"Due to various reasons, we've stopped issuing student visas. Wait for further notice,"
was said in a 100% Chinese bureaucratic tone. I understood that there was no reason at all to stay and sweat with the crowd. I pushed my way out, sat by the street, thinking, should I just go back home like that? I was reminded of Chai's saying, "There was no road." People walked on it, step by step, a road became. Just keep walking, one will get to one's destination in the end. I decided, I shouldn't go back, but forward. I must find another way that leads to my destination. Right then, a young man about my age came to chat with me. He introduced himself as Zhou Zhong.
We haven't met before. How many times have you been here?
He asked me.
First time.
I answered honestly.
This is my 11th time.
He said with a superior tone. He started to show off his rich experience and tell me all about how he did everything up to here. In the end, he asked me,
how is your financial guarantee? Is it a bank deposit certificate, or just a letter from a sponsor? If it's a bank deposit certificate, it would be much better, but if just a letter, it will be difficult.
Before my answer, he was about to continue saying something else. I knew he wasn't really interested in my situation but in finding someone to talk with so that he would have some relief from his loneliness and pity.
I have neither.
I told him the truth, in order to end the meaningless conversation.
What? You have neither money nor letter and you dare to come all the way from Hunan to here for a visa? What an international joke. I swear to you, if you can get a visa, I will put my first name last, and last name first.
Reverse family name with giving name is considered a kind of insult in China. Such a conversation brings no useful information nor good feelings but is a pure waste of a lot of time. I excused myself with something I needed to go do and left Zhuzhou. I went back to the Australian embassy, walking around looking for opportunities. An opportunity came right to me. I saw 2 Aussies, 1 female and 1 male walk out of the embassy. I went up to them pretending that I just arrived, knowing nothing about the visa situation. I asked them for the direction of the visa section, where I just came from. They stopped for me and seriously listened to my question, then very kindly pointed in the direction of the visa section. Seeing I looked a little puzzled, they said,
We are just about to go there too. If you like, we can go together.
I didn't mind, not at all. On the contrary, I was so delighted I could walk together with them, which meant we had more time to chat. In the conversation, I got to know that they were not staff of the embassy, but managers of some schools in Australia, in Beijing to recruit students. For them, students were business. Through the exchange I got to know the reason that visa issuing had stopped temporarily was because the Australian government was adjusting their overseas student policy. The people in charge of the visa section were in Australia for a meeting. They would come back in a week. What an important bit of information this was. At least I didn't have to go there every day waiting to find out which day was the right day. I made good use of that week by visiting Tianjin, the neighboring city to Beijing. Unexpectedly, during this trip I had found my key to the door of Australia. The story goes like this. After the Chinese Reform and Open Door policy, the Chinese Musicians Association established an American Music Research Association, which was located in the Tianjin Conservatory of Music. I, with my thesis of The American Jazz, became the youngest member of the association. As I was already in Tianjin, I certainly took the opportunity to visit with the General Secretary of the association. Hearing that I would study abroad very soon, which was rare and difficult then, the General Secretary appeared to be very warm and invited me home for dinner. I remember nothing from the meal, but I do remember he gave me a list of names and addresses of association members. On the list were some very famous and important leading musicians, included the country's leading soprano Zhang Quan. Back to Beijing. I paid a visit to the members on the list one by one. When I visited Zhang Quan, the old professor seemed to be very happy to see me. After a long persecution during the Cultural Revolution, she even thought of me as one of her school progeny. Professor Zhang was a graduate from the Eastman School of Music in New York. From her I gained an even more important name, the one in charge of Chinese Central Broadcasting Station's foreign music program. I went to see the head of the music section of the Chinese Central Broadcasting Station straight away. I was warmly received because I was introduced by Professor Zhang. When hearing that I was about to go to Australia for my music studies soon, he asked me for a favor. He said, "If you have a chance to meet the Australian embassy people, please pass my message to them. That is, when they provide us the music program, please give us stereo instead of mono." The person from the music program in the Australian embassy was here a few times, but we couldn't talk much due to the language barrier. Then he found a business card for the person in charge of the music program at the Australian embassy. I took a look. That gentleman was the cultural secretary of the Australian embassy. That business card became my key to Australia. The next day I went to the Australian embassy in the early morning. I showed my working ID as staff from the Hunan Broadcasting and TV Bureau, but presented myself as sent by the Chinese Central Broadcasting Station coming to see. I showed the doorman the business card of the culture secretary of the Australian embassy. A few minutes later I met the gentleman on the business card. I was respectfully invited to his office. We started to talk about music. To me, music is what? Music is my everything, my love, my passion, my job, my cup of tea. Of course I did pass along the message from the Central Broadcasting Station that their stereo music programs were appreciated, and I added, the music could be closer to the Chinese people's taste. The cultural secretary was obviously getting excited by my words. He picked up the telephone and said to me,
"If you don't mind, I would like you to meet someone, the director of the Radio Australia Chinese section. His name is John Crone. He happens to be in Beijing."
I don't mind, not at all,
I replied. How could I mind? I simply couldn't afford to mind. It was so much more than I expected. A few minutes later, Mr. John Crone shook hands with me at the cultural secretary's office. The three of us were talking in a very good mood. When the topic came to some problems about their music program and their communication difficulties with the Chinese, the secretary suddenly asked Mr. Crone,
"Why don't you ask Mr. Chen to see if he would like to help us?"
Mr. Crone catered to his superior, saying,
"You know what? I thought the same. In fact, I have been looking for a person who is mainland Chinese and understands English, Western culture as well as music and radio broadcasting."
I was more than delighted. My English was simply not good enough to describe how excited I was at that very moment, yet my words came out like this.
I would love to help you, but...
But what? They asked the same question at the same time.
But I'm on my way to Eastman School of Music in New York.
I didn't wait for too long to tell them that I could postpone going to the USA and instead help them at Radio Australia located in Melbourne, for a short period of time.
Do you have a passport?
The secretary asked. Yes, I do. Answered me.
Have you got your passport with you now?
The secretary asked again. Yes, I do, answered me again. He kept asking. Yes, I do. I kept answering positively.
How is your financial situation? I mean, do you have a bank account in Australia?
He looked at my eyes with the last but maybe the most important question.
Yes, I do. I mean, I will have as soon as I am in Australia.
When can you depart for Australia?
This question was asked by Mr. Crone.
At once, immediately, right away.
I couldn't help standing up from my chair.
Okay, everything sounds great. Could you leave your passport here?
That was the real final question of the secretary.
Yes, I would be very happy to leave my passport here. But for how long?
I asked.
Until tomorrow morning 10 o'clock. Okay.
The secretary raised his hand to shake mine, which meant bye-bye. Mr. Crone walked me out of the office. We talked about a plan for making a series of radio programs introducing Australian music to Chinese people. But Mr. Crone made it very clear and repeatedly that it would only be a part-time job, not enough to make a living. I told him not to worry as I had other means to make my living. The next morning at 10 o'clock sharp, I received my passport, with a visa to Australia. I felt my body was floating in the air and could not remember whether I walked out or flew out of the embassy. I went to the visa section again on purpose, looking at the crowd with a satisfactory smile of victory. In the crowd, I discovered that man again. What was his name again? Zhu Zhong. If he replaced his last name with his first name, it would be Zhongzhu, which sounds like boar in the Chinese language. I was so amused I burst into laughter. I waved at him. He noticed me and walked towards me. I couldn't wait until he got closer, because that would simply be too cruel. I only waved my passport and kept my voice down enough so that he couldn't hear.
See you in Australia.
9. Leaving my motherland for a foreign land. After I had my visa, the very first person I must see was certainly my wife Dongya. I went from Beijing directly to Shanghai. Dongya arranged for me to stay at a guest house of the Shanghai Public Health Bureau where she used to work. After a simple meal at a cheap place, she asked me,
"Do you come for the procedure?"
All procedures going abroad are set. What else?
I asked.
No need to pretend. You are here for divorce procedure, right?
Dongya said it very clearly with a calm demeanor.
Divorce?
Although I felt the day of divorce would come sometime, it wasn't true that I was there for divorce, at least not that time.
It's okay. To tell the truth is, since the day we got married I knew today would come. Only I didn't expect it to come so soon.
Dongya proceeded to tell me a shocking story that I had not known until that day. Dongya told me that when my father came to Shanghai from Hunan to ask Dongya to get married with me, she felt very envious that I had a father who would ask a girl to marry his son so that his son wouldn't get in trouble in his working unit because of the girl's pregnancy. Yet my father's explanation shocked Dongya. My father said,
"If you still don't understand the real meaning of the marriage, I will have to make it more clear to you. I do this, not for the sake of him,
my father even wouldn't call me my son,
but completely for the sake of you. In fact, for the sake of anyone I would do the same, because only I understand him the most. Saying one's own son isn't a good person is something very painful. As a father, I'm not able to change him, but should at least work hard to prevent him causing trouble for the society. In other words, to keep his damage at the minimum level to the society. Please believe me, this time I'm asking you to get married with that person completely for your sake, for the sake of your reputation in society. If you are married, the relationship between you and him would be legal. Marriage and divorce is a normal phenomenon, not a scandal. No one would say anything about it."
Dongya was shocked by the words coming out from my father's mouth and asked,
"Divorce? What about the little baby inside me?"
That is why you should not give birth to the child. Because I'm sure he won't be with you for very long. As I told you, no one knows him better than me.
Seeing Dongya in a state of confusion, father added,
"We don't want a criminal in the family, and you are the one who can prevent him from that. For him, for us, and mostly for yourself, if you really love him, you should marry him and divorce him."
Hearing that, Dongya had nothing further to say. My father continued his persuasion.
"About this matter, I have exchanged thoughts with your mother. I think, as long as you don't give birth to the child, she wouldn't be against your marriage as much as before."
Finally, father ended his brainwash like this.
"This time, I came to Shanghai especially for you, therefore I have no intention to see him. There is no need for you to tell him either. Let's promise to keep this as a secret between us, until the day you two divorce."
Secret, what a powerful word. It was that word which captured half the heart of Dongya.
No wonder as soon as we got our marriage certificate you asked me to accompany you to the hospital for an abortion. So it was that old man's setting.
I suddenly realized the truth and felt a bit shocked.
Now you know what happened.
Dongya went on.
Remember what I said to you when we got out of the hospital after the abortion?
I remember her saying, I swore I would never have a baby again in my life. But Dongya stopped, perhaps having no strength, or realizing that it wasn't necessary to say again. No quarrel, no intermediation, no law court, we divorced, very peacefully and calmly. The very last words Dongya left me with were,
Do you know what was the real and most important reason I decided to go for the abortion? It was because I was frightened that my child would have a father who treats him just like your father treats you.
My father's image came into my mind. I had felt a little closer and that he was worthy of respect just a short while ago. Now again, it had all gone back. Oh God. Like that, I left my wife, though never had a home together nor really lived together like a family, but the very first wife of mine, never having contact again, until today. Leaving my working unit and fellow colleagues. Returning to my working unit, the Hunan Broadcasting and TV Orchestra, I started sorting out things, cleaning, throwing garbage. Each time it comes to moving to another place, I always have no idea where so many useless things come from, burning documents and personal letters as well as photographs. The rest of my property that had any value I sold, or simply gave away. Seeing all this, my colleagues no longer asked testing questions such as, when will you go? On the contrary, all of them became overly friendly. 11. Leaving my family. I used almost all the money I had gotten from selling Chinese paintings to the Australian Cultural Group for an air ticket to Melbourne. The last day before leaving for Australia, my elder brother asked me to have a meal at his place. I went there to see a full table of dishes waiting for me. In addition to the dishes were other members of my family, my parents, elder brother and his wife, and of course Mimi was there too. The dishes on the table were made by my elder brother's wife, the so-called big sister. Let me borrow this opportunity to talk a little about my sister-in-law. I had always opposed them as a couple. I once even wanted to threaten big sister that I would tell my brother about the she and our father thing at the farm. But they got married after all, while I was studying in Shanghai. Facts are facts. Does it make any sense to mention those past matters anymore? For the sake of my elder brother, I had to cover all the facts inside me. But inside my heart I cursed my father, seeing him as no more than a monster covered with human skin and the appearance of always doing the right thing. Perhaps to keep their dignity, my parents showed neither happiness nor celebration on their faces. They didn't even mention my going abroad. Seeing me saying nothing, only eating, my mother couldn't hold it any longer. She said,
We don't exactly support your going abroad, but if you insist on going, we will not object either.
She took out an envelope, the inside full of small bills, and explained.
I have counted, there are a total of 200 renminbi in it.
200 Chinese RMB. Was the sum total of support I received from my parents from my university education up to the point of going overseas for further education. I looked at the envelope in my hand. Suddenly all of the dishes tasted the same, bitter. Thinking back, so many thunders and storms, winds and frosts through all the years, thinking forward, unknown difficulties and obstacles I would go on to encounter, my heart cries with no tears. Just before I was about to leave, I wanted to say something exciting.
Please don't worry about me, I would.
I wasn't quite finished when my father cut in.
Worry? No worries anymore. At least you won't make more damage to our Chinese society.
After a light laugh, Father's facial expression became very serious. as if he was worried I would expand the damage to more people, but this time, all over the world. Like always, it was Mimi acting as the family representative. Just as she saw me off to Shanghai, she accompanied me to Guangzhou to see me board the flight to Melbourne. In Guangzhou, to save money, Mimi and I shared a hotel room as brother and sister. Then an unmarried couple couldn't share a room in a hotel. We were in the same room but not the same bed, as there were 2 beds in the room. Nothing happened until the middle of night when I woke up for the toilet and found Mimi was not sleeping at all. We turned on the light and started to chat. She tried to ask me how my married life was with Dongya. Once I realized she was actually referring more to our private life, I stopped, as I felt somehow uneasy talking about my life with my wife to her, as a sister, especially the test tube business. I turned off the light and went back to sleep. Mimi lost her temper. Only once in our lives in my memory had she behaved like that. But the next morning, everything was back to normal. Mimi, too, behaved normal, as if nothing had happened during the night. Just before I boarded my aircraft, I passed her that envelope, the envelope of 200 renminbi, which my parents gave me as their support for my education overseas, and said to her,
"Buy some candy that you like."
The flight of Cathay Pacific took off down the runway, carrying me with my dream, leaving my motherland for a completely unknown world.